boys, or I mean, quote unquote Kentucky boys. Shout out to Shaedon Sharpe and his legendary none and done season. So I mean, it's pretty interesting to see where he's at, and he's definitely the biggest wild card mystery man, as many people have stated. But I mean, for you at least, CJ, and I think my question is, especially with the draft age changing soon, and it's not a position that you really envy after, or just particularly in the past, especially when it comes to like evaluators having to really, whether it was like the KGs, the Kobe's, when the high school guys were coming out previously, and you didn't have as much of tape on those guys playing in high level organized games. So I mean, what do you make of Shade? And obviously this is a long-term pick if you are taking Shade anywhere inside the top 10. And if you watch the EYBL stuff that he did, like it's not hard to see why his handlers shut it down on him early, because if you do dig into the tape, you can see the inklings of a really dynamic scorer in the future. But long term, and the possibility of what Shading can be, and who he is, for my question for you, CJ. But like, in a like, let's say he does hit on his upside, like how high of this class in terms of that upside can that take him, when the dust settles on this class?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a reason that he's being talked about as this top 7, 8 guy without ever playing a season of college basketball and coming straight from the EYBL. He's a really talented prospect. And I think the first couple weeks of his, he declared for the draft, all that stuff, and people were, I thought, a little bit too high on him. Like maybe talking about him at 4 over Ivy, like all that stuff is crazy to me because you have the solid production of like Jaden Ivey is, Shaedon Sharpe could even become Jaden Ivey. Like he's already that prospect that we're talking about. But I think it's kind of flipped in the other direction where I think consensus might actually be a little bit too low on him now because I'm seeing a lot of him like falling to OKC at 12 and stuff like that. And he really is a talented prospect. And in 2022, I don't think you could be like, he's some mystery guy that no one has ever seen. Like these NBA scouts are watching EYBL tape now. They have guys on staff directly to watch these games, and everybody saw what he did. And the fact that he didn't play this last year at Kentucky doesn't make him any worse of a prospect. He just makes him a harder evaluation, right? So if your staff is coming to you telling you like, look, he's not Jaden Ivey, nobody's Jaden Ivey, but after the first 4, 5, 6 guys in this draft, he's your best shot at getting a guy that could be a top 50, top 60 star player, then I would consider taking him. I think I probably have him somewhere around 7, 8 right now. And I think that's a nice, reasonable middle ground on Shaedon. I don't think that he has that true superstar potential because he's not at this point like a high level game processor. He's not like throwing passes out in all directions, stuff like that. But he's a really impressive finisher. He's a high level athlete. The handle isn't quite where you want it to be to project like that high level impact, but that doesn't make him like a bad prospect. It just takes him out of that tier of like superstar prospect to, I don't know. I don't even think he's like a 2, 3 years away guy. I think he's going to be raw at first because he hasn't played in a year and a half, or I mean, a year, and he didn't play college ball and all that reasons and stuff. But I think he's like a reasonably good NBA prospect, and I'd have no issue taking him top 10.
Yeah, this brings me to like thinking about back in the day when used to have to scout high school players. That tape is tricky to me, just because at times these players are on teams that are just so much better than the competition that they're playing, and if you're an NBA prospect in high school, that shows. Like you are head and shoulders of, you're a man amongst boys when you're playing these things. So it's like I tend to rely sometimes on that college tape because you're playing against some grown men at that point, like those super seniors and seniors. You're gonna have to play against a bit better physical specimen. With that being said, Sharpe, his physical attributes alone, with the 7-foot wingspan, the explosion, and all of that leaves you like kind of jaw dropping. Like you're like, all right, this kid has kind of that kind of athleticism, and his tape backs that up. So now when it comes to not playing in a year, it's like, all right, he hasn't played against better competition. this year. But like you said, the NBA scouts have been scouting, those rec leagues, the freaking, entertainer basketball classics, like all of the AAU circuits, all of that. Like they're there and they're watching him play. So from what I've seen and what I've seen on this tape, the highlight reels and the tape speaks for itself. Do I question him? Like, I wouldn't take him obviously in the top 5. I think that's where it comes down to. Like, those guys, I value production, and they produced on the next level. Those five players that you would take ahead of him. Now, if your team that's taking a flyer with somebody on some star potential, maybe not superstar, like you said, I think anywhere between 6 and 12 is good value for him. And it's just now, how much time do you give him before you give up on him? And it's like, go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, no, I mean, see, my question for you on this, and it kind of just gets into more of like the levels that they're playing at. So it's just like, how do you go about it? This is just like something I struggle with because these points that we watch them, that these kids, each competition level, it's always good to see them go up against their peers and guys that are actually high level NBA prospects. But when it comes to like the different circuits, when it comes to like Pangos, Grind Session, like Peach Jam, like some of these sessions are like, there's things that can be taken away. Some of them are just like glorified like pickup games and like back and forth, up and down. So I mean, for me at least, I love, like, because if you watch Shaedon, for me at least, like watching, like, if you can get a sample of these kids playing at like the FIBA games or something, those are much more like schemed and circuited. They actually be like held accountable. So like when you're watching like AAU tape or like high school tape, how do you go through parsing through like what actually can be taken away and what might just be noise and like just purely like using your athletic gifts to shine against other guys which you can't get away with at other levels as much?
Yeah, that's what you have to look for, that last bit that you touched on. Are you winning with athleticism and strength, or are you winning with skill? And I think that's a big differentiator. And like Raz was saying, the guys 1 through 5, 1 through 6 for me are like production, right? You have that next level college production. And what we're the only thing we're doing here is narrowing our range of outcomes, right? You're more likely to be a high level player if you've produced at a high level in college than you are if you produce at a high level in high school. So we saw a bunch of these guys this year that we thought were going to be high level college players from high school, and they didn't necessarily have the impact that we thought they were going to. Patrick Baldwin Jr. was one of them. But that doesn't mean that Shaedon isn't going to be a good prospect. It's riskier because we have less tape on him. But if you just say, like, I know less about him, I'm less sure about him, so I'm just going to like leave it to someone else to pick him, you're going to leave value out on a table. There's a certain spot where the value proposition is worth it. And in my opinion, it's not over any of the top 6 guys in this class who were both high-level high school players and also high-level college players, right? We check both of those boxes. But when you have some of these guys that aren't necessarily like star bets, at a certain point, you're talking about, is this guy going to be impactful enough over replacement level to like take the swing? Like Keegan Murray, I think, is a great basketball player, but Keegan Murray is also more likely to be a guy that slots in as your 5th starter, 4th starter, maybe a guy that in his realm of outcomes, he's like rotation player, stuff like that. Like Shaedon has top 2 player on the floor, top 3 player on the floor upside. And also in some of his outcomes, like he's just a rotation player. It's not like every single time he's either an all-star or a bust, So he has a wider range of outcomes because he doesn't have that college production like Raz was talking about. So you just have to balance that all out and find the spot where you are comfortable slotting that in with these guys that we know more about. Because every other one of these prospects, we have seen more games in more different contexts than we have of Shaedon.